weekly newsletters I've done. And I would really urge you to, take a look. And Shrikant, I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look.
I have. Very impressive. I recommend it wholeheartedly to your listeners as well. Discussion we have at home as well. I think if you went back in the one thing I'm fortunate about is I do read quite a bit, and this is something I learned from my parents. They both read, and therefore I've read, and that helps. And I would recommend to all our listeners there is no substitute to just reading and being curious. That's number one. But the way one read has changed. Earlier, I probably read books. I'd buy a book and read it. I still do buy physical books. That just tells you how old I am. There's no substitute sitting with a cup of coffee and reading a book when you can. But time is difficult to find all the time. And therefore, I end up learning in what I'd call smaller bits. Going back to your point about stackable, that's how I learn a lot more. I listen to some podcasts, podcasts like the one we're doing today. I read in small bits, and I probably read less books end to end. I tend to read like certain snippets of those or certain key components, move on. But the other thing I've really learned from, which is different from before, is I learn a lot more through conversations today. I learn by talking to people who are outside of your normal working environment, and because often we talk about connecting the dots, and I know you and I spoke about this, right? All of us say you connect the dots, you get a clearer picture. If you pick a dot which is way outside your landscape, it just opens up a whole new vista to the picture. And that's how I found I learn. Like I said, one thing I've tried to do very consciously, because I used to think I was tech savvy, but clearly an AI native workforce is far more tech savvy than I am. And there are certain things that I've learned. For me, even today, while I use the mobile a lot, I use it like a desktop, or I mean a laptop, right? For a mobile first Gen Z audience, a laptop is a very archaic concept. So how do they interact with technology? I talk to a lot of young people wherever I can. My daughter's friends, others are learners themselves. So it's a combination of all these aspects. So all I'd say is, you know, spending too much time curating what you learn is often, in my view, the biggest disservice you can do to yourself. Yes, there are certain areas you want to focus on learning for because they're related to your work or your skill, but being curious sometimes opens up some amazing things. Personally, I'm a big history buff. For example, I read a lot of history. In a different world, I might have been a history professor, for all you know, but reading history sometimes gives me different parallels or context that I can relate to today's environment. Other people use others. I'd say just be curious. Just be curious and be insatiable. That's probably the best way to learn. So yeah.
Who are some of your favorite writers? What are
Yeah.
some of the
So
books you would
look,
recommend?
in recent times, I've read a lot on technology. I really enjoyed Mustafa Suleiman's book on AI. That was actually very very good. But if you take I read a lot of Yuval Noah Harari as well. I mean, I'm a big fan of his books. I've read a lot of Michael Lewis's books as well. He's got a very interesting take on sort of the I think the interaction between society and economy and certain specific businesses, if you call it that. But I also, end up reading, like I said, history. So coming back to India, interestingly, I've read every one of William Dalrymple's books, and
Oh, one of my favorites too.
and his podcast is something I've listened to as well. So that's actually quite interesting. So quite a wide variety in that sense. So yeah.